Hi. It is so good to see you, and I'm so sorry I've been gone. You can almost bet that if I'm not posting generally regularly, there are some massively crazy things going on in my life, and many of you know I've had a lot of them lately, and so I am sorry, but my goal is to continue to keep posting, and I really am, when I'm not here, thinking of more ways I want to be here. So I hope that you will continue to join me, and I appreciate you so much. I wanted to share, I have lots of things I want to share, and I'm trying to figure out a schedule and a way to do things more often, because what I'm noticing is that right now, for me, being a creator and being online is actually not the greatest thing at times for my mental health. And yet it is so incredibly important to me to also continue sharing the things that I believe in. In fact, I'll be sharing a book soon that an author recently sent me of a book that's coming out, and I read the entire book in a weekend, and it was just so inspiring in so many ways. And so I'm going to be collaborating and hopefully bringing the author on my podcast or my YouTube, I guess my YouTube video podcast, hopefully soon. But it inspired a couple of things. And one of them is to really talk about identifying patterns of harm that many of us don't recognize. In fact, the last video I posted, I just kind of made it on the fly, and it seems like it may have resonated with many of you. And I think that that is just so profound, because what kept me in some very significantly harmful relationships with parents and partners is that I didn't recognize that certain things were that harmful for me until they became like screaming red lights harmful, and yet so much damage had been done. So that is what is really inspiring me right now. And that really is what inspired today's video, is that last weekend I ended up watching, which I usually don't watch things like this for many reasons. Hold on, Bear is playing with a toy. 1 second. Come here, Bear. Look how big he's getting. Oh my goodness. Can you say hi? Say hi. As I ended up watching the Ruby Franke documentary, and I don't really ever watch things like that. I can watch violence, but the bottom line is it was so triggering, and I just found myself super dysregulated, very emotional. And it's obviously like most people would be emotional by watching what I believe was torture, not just harm, but torture. But I kept thinking about it, and I knew because of one image in the documentary that it was landing somewhere personally for me, and I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. I had some ideas. And then I had therapy on Mondays. And I told my therapist, I was like, I know we need to work on this. And this is why I love therapy, and the magic, I believe, of therapy is that within about 10 minutes, we got to something that really, it was like I couldn't stop ruminating on it. And that is the thing about an unconscious or trigger, is that I kept seeing the image of the youngest daughter when the police go and find her finally and rescue her and the younger boy. Their faces aren't shown, and you see his wounds. And in fact, what you see on him is actually worse in terms of photography and pictures and documentary evidence. But she is sitting, this little girl with her head shaved, on the floor in the closet like this. And, yes, that was triggering. But I just kept thinking about her, and I could not stop, and it was like really bothering me. I think I watched it on Saturday, so it was Monday now, right? I'm still thinking about it. And I realized that what I was connecting to was that little girl in being trapped in some extremely harmful situations, both in my childhood and particularly one in my marriage, which was significant. And someday I will talk about it, I hope. But the bottom line is, once we identified the qualities in her, it wasn't just my compassion for her, obviously, but that I was identifying with her. And in terms of both experiencing and witnessing harm, and also being on the other side of wanting someone to come save you. And this is what I want to share with you really quickly, is that oftentimes when you're triggered, you don't necessarily know what it is. And one of the signs can be this ruminating and going back over the same image from a movie, from a book, whatever it is, but you just can't stop it. And so this is what I would encourage you to do, because once I made that connection, it completely freed me. I just thought about the family appropriately in terms of like, it didn't have my stuff in it. It was like, oh, that's devastating and that's horrific. And how many people did not step in at the right time, and the way our system works and how flawed it is, because I truly believe with all of my heart that there is so much more harm going on in people's homes than anyone ever recognizes or admits, from physical, mental, and emotional harm. And so when you're finding yourself ruminating like that, I would really encourage you to, on the image, ask yourself what part of this visual, this memory, this image, especially if it's not you, what do I think they would feel? Or, what emotions are coming up for me? And then ask yourself, for example, trapped, alone, when did I feel like that? And then trying to narrow in on the situations. Now, obviously, if you have trauma, you might want to do this with your therapist. Don't do this necessarily on your own if you're afraid of it creating some more harm for you. But in many cases, these are things that this thing that happened to me was like literally almost, 17 years ago. And yet I couldn't believe how much it activated me. And so the idea is for you to connect to those, ask yourself, what would they be feeling? And then what was I feeling? And then to kind of work through and talk through with yourself, or journal or write about, or listen to music about, in some way to acknowledge that that's a part of you that you still hold on to. And that can also be a great way to direct you towards something like a therapy book, podcast, session, things like that. So that's my first part one of this video. Part two is what I've decided to start doing, and we'll see how it goes, is to continue to talk about here and on my other accounts on TikTok and Instagram, which I've barely posted on in the last few months, and my new Substack account where I'm generally posting every week. I did not post last week because I was not feeling well and had a lot of things going on in my family, but to follow me there if you want to, and connect to community and other ideas. But as I post on Substack, I talk a lot about, trauma and autism, and even things like recipes for autoimmune. And I love to talk about films and pop culture. Right now, I just finished the Paradise on Hulu show. Amazing, super good. And White Lotus, of course, I'm just so deep into that. I'm actually loving it. People are saying it's going slowly, but I love the characters. And so I'm going to probably talk about them more too. So my goal is to post and come on every day and talk about things, if I can, because I feel like right now when I'm going on social media, it feels so doom and gloom, and frankly, it is for me in many ways. But I also was like, I would just love to have somewhere to go, because I follow so many incredibly talented, political creators and content creators and all of that, but also a place to go where we don't have to just I just need a moment to not be in that. This is not to say not to, get yourself involved in advocacy and all of those things, because they're very important. But I think many of us are so flooded right now that it's also been difficult. And so wherever you are in that spectrum, I do support you. But I also wanted to say, how can I create something also where maybe you could just spend 10 minutes with me or another creator like me. I would encourage you to not have your entire feed be all things that feel overwhelming. I actually worked to reshape my algorithm a little bit with more animal videos and a little more funny things where I could, because I just was feeling so overwhelmed. And it's frankly why I have not been, between my personal life and what's difficult for me right now, is being on social media and it not being good for me. And yet I know that it can also be like a place to feel connected and a sense of community. Okay. That made me think about, obviously, the Ruby Franke thing about the different forms of harm, because I fully believe that no child should be used for content. In fact, now on social media, I'm actually scrolling past even the cutest child videos. I just don't think it's okay. And I did not know about the 8-passenger stuff because I wasn't really on YouTube back then. But the evolution of Ruby from her initial posting until the just beyond horrific harm, there were seeds of harm already happening. And even in the documentary, someone says, I think she was already harming her kids, from the beginning. It's just that it escalated because she was so deep in the belief that her kids were frankly possessed, which is just a whole other, I'm not going to go down that road. But I wanted to talk about, I know I'm rambling, about books. I have so many incredible self-help books, and they're just, it's like, it gets overwhelming. So I thought what I'd start doing is pulling out little passages and little pieces of content and talking about them. And that really inspired me from that particular thing to look in and go back to something I talk so much about, which is parents who have often narcissistic and or untreated borderline dynamics. And this, it really is the book that I was 50 years old in a doctoral program, but BPD had been so stigmatized that I did not realized my own mom, most definitely, one of the things she struggled with was having undiagnosed borderline. And then that brought me to, which I know I made a video about this years ago, which is like, what are the qualities in moms who are harmful? And so these are 10 things, actually 13, sorry, that the book talks about that can be very harmful. And look, no parent is perfect and all of that. So just always that caveat. And we all have our bad moments. This is about patterns, right? Consistent patterns. Number one, confuses her child. The thing about having trauma and harm from a parent is that it is often inherently confusing. And why is that? That is because we often get what I've talked about, good love, bad love. Essentially, most parents, until like at the documentary at the end, are not bad all of the time. Obviously, I'm not talking about the Ruby Frankes. I'm talking about a lot of parents who are deep in their own unhealed trauma, their own undiagnosed, untreated struggles, and don't recognize it. So they might say to you, like, I love you so much, like, I'm so proud of you, and then be like, why are you wearing that? You look like a hoe or something like that. I'm sorry, but I hear that. My point is that, like, they can say things good to you, but when they say the bad things to you, it's confusing. It's like, well, which am I? Am I good or am I bad, Am I problematic? Am I unworthy of love? Am I not? So confusion. And that's the thing I think I felt a lot. It's like, well, she says she loves me and she's my biggest champion, but also she does and says horrible things. So that's important. Number two, does not apologize and or does not remember harmful, inappropriate behaviors. It's really important to be able to say, you know what? I'm really sorry. It's not okay that I yelled at you and I will work on that. Please forgive me. I need to work better on managing my stress, but that was not an acceptable way to talk to you, things like that. If you're apologizing also, that's great. But if you're always apologizing, that's a problem too, right? So, but it is important to own your behavior and say, it wasn't okay. I'm sorry. Let me work harder to do a better job. And also gives your kids permission to not be perfect. Number three, expects to be taken care of. This is a huge one. A lot of parents with unhealed wounds make their children into little therapists, little best friends, right? This is enmeshment. This can also be parentification, where essentially the parent makes the child take care of them. It's like, mommy's crying, I need you to fix me, or daddy's being a jerk, or mommy's being a jerk. I talked about this in my last video. So it is not your child's job to take care of you. Now, quick caveat, as I always say, when you're a single parent, sometimes things spill over. As your kids get older, they become young adults, it happens a little bit more. And I think that's a different conversation. But when I'm talking about this one, it's for most of us who were raised like this, where this becomes our hypervigilance, our people pleasing, our, kind of codependent rotating around others. We can't be okay if you're not okay, and it's our job to fix you. And for many of us, that first begins with our own parents. And this could be any parent, mother, father, however they identify. Number four, punishes or discourages independence. So is threatened by new friends, or always has an excuse about why you can't have the door shut to your room or have privacy, or goes through your things, or discourages you from separating and age appropriately doing more things. These parents often couch this in like, I'm just overprotective and all of that. And like, for example, the sleepover thing, like I totally get that. I did not like my kids sleeping over at people's houses, and I would more often than not, have them come to my house if I could. But if you never let your kids do anything as they age and get older and practice, then how are they going to learn to be autonomous, right? So that's important. And everyone can make their own rules about that. But if you couch everything and I'm keeping you safe in a bubble, then how are they going to manage you? How are they going to manage their own lives when they're not in your bubble? Number five, envies, ignores, or demeans her children's accomplishments. Now, don't forget there can be a pretty large overlay of narcissistic qualities, often for those with BPD and vice versa. And so there can be a threat where don't get bigger than I am, don't shine brighter, things like that. Or the jealousy is just obvious. Number six, destroys, denigrates, or undermines self-esteem. And this is essentially what I'm talking about, where you're confused, where parents often split, where you're the good child or the bad child. They project their bad, yucky feelings onto you because they can't tolerate them. And when you are consistently calling your kid names. Hey, dummy. Hey, stupid. Things like that. Well, why couldn't you do that? I mean, like I've said, we all have said thoughtless things, but when there's a pattern or it's like a ha-ha condescending, like I'm better than you, narcissistic parents are always like this. Like, well, that was, you're good at that, but when I was a kid, I did this. That is harmful to your child's self-esteem, and not having a safe place to land is one of the biggest pieces of harm to a child's self-esteem. Number 7, expects children to respond to the parents' needs. That goes back to what I said earlier. I'm not going to go down that road, but you know what I'm talking about. Frightens and upsets their children. That is number 8. This is the parent who often screams and yells and loses it, or gives like the harsh punishments or silent treatment. When you are instilling fear in a child, that is the heart of disorganized attachment, where the source of safety is also the source of fear. And don't forget, fear, it doesn't mean Ruby Franke level of horror or torture. It's mommy's going to blow, daddy's going to scream and yell, daddy's going to get drunk and crash the car into the garage, or parent, whatever it is. If your kids are afraid of you, and this is the whole argument about using harsh discipline, in the moment your kids will comply because they're scared. And I just don't think that's a helpful way. And the research shows that spanking and things like that can be incredibly harmful to your child's self-esteem. This is not to say that you shouldn't have consequences and conversations and ways to teach and learn, but punishing and harming your child only works in the moment to get compliance, and it does nothing but make them walk around the world afraid of getting in trouble and someone else harming them, and them not learning to internalize and becoming their own inner parent about, yeah, I don't like how I handled that, or I could do better at that. They often have a very harsh, shameful voice, which is the harmful, abusive parent's voice. Number 9, same thing, disciplines inconsistently or punitively. Now, I think all of us can have, inconsistencies. One day it's like, that thing you did was fine. But my mom was like, she used to joke about this. She's like, one day I think what you said was funny. The next day I might, do this to your face. And so we're talking about harmful inconsistencies that are significant and punitive. It's very punishing, shame-filled, terrorizing your kids, making them feel just as bad about themselves as you could as a punishment. The next one is feels left out, jealous, or resentful if the child is loved by someone else. This is a huge one, and it is really common, I think, in divorce. There's this threat that you might be loved more or loved less. And I know that can be hard, especially in high conflict situations. And, but as I always say, like, you don't need to do a whole lot of bad talking about the other parent, because your kids will figure it out. And the worst thing is, when this happened to me, people would say, oh, they'll figure it out. And it was like, well, I don't want them to figure it out. I don't want them to think, oh, that's a bad parent, and yeah, you're the better parent. Because essentially that's still their parent, the one that was harmful. And that's something they still have to process and work on. And so that could be a whole other video. But it's important to know that I always feel like the more people that love my kids, the better. And so as they find partners, when they find loving partners, for me, it's like I always wanted a family. And so it makes me happy to know that other people love them and care about them. The next one is uses threats of abandonment or actual abandonment to punish the child. I'll just never come back. Well, sorry, my eye is like messed up. I think I've got cat hair. I'll just never come back, or fine, I'll just leave. If you don't love me as your mother or father or care about me, then you can live with someone else. I mean, look, we all think, like I've said, I've raised 4 kids, but mostly alone. I have thought things and I'm sure said things I don't always feel good about. But the intention is to come back to center and own it and repair it and have it not be like the ultimate pattern. So have self-compassion if you're parenting also, but also hold yourself accountable. Number 12, does not believe that children are inherently good. And that is what that whole documentary was just horrifying. It's like, of course, that's an extreme case, but the bottom line is you don't see your child as a child. They remind you of the other parent, or they're threatening or whatever, or they're bad and you have to teach them to be good. Like, children are inherently born good. Yes, things can complicate those pictures, but it's important that you see that you, when you look at your child, your eyes light up at times, hopefully more often than not. I have to take a break. I have a cat here. Hold on. Sorry, I think I have too many cats now with Coco and Bear. He's in the cat tree. I don't know if you can see him. This is the best cat tree ever. I just got it recently. And lastly, does not trust their children. Really important. It's like, like you see them as like trying to harm you, betray you, steal, cheat, lie, steal, things like that. And it's important to know that, yes, you have to teach them what's the consequence of lying. And, all kids lie. They lie to self-protect more than anything else. And so teaching them that they can trust themselves to tell you what they did, and they're not going to be punitive and be harmful. All of those are so important. This video was longer than I wanted it to be, but I really wanted to share the trigger thing because this is why I love psychology and the power of therapy, because like I said, I was so deep in this like place, and understanding it was helpful. And then I really wanted to start sharing some of the book content. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. Have a lovely, beautiful day. Please take care of yourselves. If you too are struggling with what's happening in the world, please be mindful of your social media exposure. Give yourself timeouts and breaks. Do more reading, more walking, more binge watching shows even. I find that social media, especially right now, if you have a brain also that needs to know what's going on like I do, but also is very easily like harmed by content sometimes, or the world, that's a tough place to be. And so this goes back to reparenting yourself, as I talk about both here and in my courses and everywhere else. So anyway, thanks for being here. Please stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.